The dirt road still held the day's heat when she appeared on the horizon, carrying a faded suitcase and a look that pleaded for rest more than shelter. The wind carried the scent of rain and loneliness. In that small town, where everyone knew everyone else's business, there was a man who preferred silence to gossip, a widowed farmer who lived alone with his young son up on the hill. When she knocked on his door asking for just a corner to sleep, he could have said no. But after a long silence, he simply opened the gate. "I don't have a corner, miss, but what I have is a home, and a home is for those who need to start over." That simple gesture would transform them both and show the whole town that love sometimes begins with a humble request and an open door. Subscribe to the channel for heartwarming stories every day. The hill held its silence like a mourner holds grief. The wooden house at the top, with its narrow windows and porch weathered by time, seemed to watch over the town below, distant enough not to partake in the gossip, close enough to hear the church bells on Sundays. Inside, Tomas absently rolled the dish towel in his hands. The kitchen smelled of reheated coffee and stale bread. The boy, Miguel, sat at the table, his feet swinging in the air, pushing beans from one side of his plate to the other. He wasn't eating. He just watched his father with those eyes, too big for his small face. "Eat, son," Tomas said without looking, his voice rough from speaking little. The boy didn't answer. He just dropped his fork with a dull clatter. Tomas sighed. 3 years. 3 years since Marta had passed, taken by a fever the town doctor couldn't cure. 3 years since the house had become just a place where two bodies slept, woke, existed. They didn't live. They existed. He washed the dishes in silence, feeling the cold water sting his hands. Through the window, he saw the heavy sky, laden with rain that refused to fall. The cattle lowed in the distance. The gate creaked in the wind. Everything was predictable. Everything was empty. At night, after putting Miguel to bed, the boy who slept clutching a worn cloth horse, the only toy left from his mother, Tomas sat on the porch. The wooden bench groaned under his weight. He lit the lantern and sat there, watching the darkness swallow the road. The loneliness didn't hurt anymore. It just weighed him down. But that night, something would change. Because in the shadows of the road, a figure walked slowly, stumbling over stones, carrying an invisible burden heavier than the worn suitcase in her hands. Tomas saw her when she was still just a dark smudge against the sky. He squinted. Visitors were rare. Visitors on foot at night were impossible. She stopped before the gate, hesitated. Her shoulders rose and fell, her breath coming in short gasps. Then, with a voice trembling not from cold but from something much deeper, she called out, "Is anyone home?" Tomas didn't answer immediately. He watched. She was thin, her dark hair pulled back haphazardly, her dress dusty. A woman who had come from afar, a woman running from something. "What are you looking for?" he asked, his voice firm but not hostile. She tightened her grip on the suitcase handle, swallowed hard. "Just a corner to sleep, sir. I can pay. Or work, or..." Her voice faltered. "I just need a place. Just for tonight." The wind blew between them, carrying the scent of damp earth that hadn't yet fallen. Tomas knew what the town would say. He knew the corner store was probably already buzzing. He knew the wiry priest, who showed up at everyone else's homes in the morning, would ask questions. But he looked at this woman, at the way she held the suitcase as if it were the last thing in the world, at the way she avoided his eyes, and saw something he recognized. Weariness. Not the weariness of the body. The weariness of someone who had carried too much for too long. He stood up slowly, walked down the porch steps, opened the gate with his calloused hands. "I don't have a corner, miss," he said, and she was already starting to retreat when he added, "But what I have is a home. And a home is for those who need to start over." She blinked. A tear traced a quick path down her cheek, which she wiped away with the back of her hand. "I don't want to be a burden, sir." "Then don't be. Come on in." and she stepped inside, and the rain, finally, began to fall. The kitchen was dark when Tomas lit the lantern. The orange light flickered on the wooden walls, casting long shadows. He gestured to a chair at the table, and she sat down slowly, as if afraid of breaking something. "Are you hungry?" he asked. She shook her head, but her stomach betrayed her with a low rumble. Tomas didn't comment. He simply placed the kettle on the wood-burning stove, stirred the embers that still glowed from dinner, and cut thick slices of bread. She watched him with attentive eyes, the way he moved with economical gestures, like someone who had been doing everything alone for a long time. She noticed the absence. No apron hanging, no embroidered towel, no scent of a woman in the house. When the coffee was ready, he poured 2 mugs and pushed one towards her with butter and bread. "Thank you," she whispered, her hands trembling as she held the warm mug. Tomas sat on the other side, but didn't drink. He just waited. She ate slowly, each bite seeming to take effort. When she finished, she wiped her lips with the sleeve of her dress and finally met his gaze. "My name is Clara." "Tomas." Silence. The wind rattled the windows. The rain sang on the tin roof. "I came from the south," she continued, her voice low. "I have nowhere to go back to. I have no one." He nodded. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask what she was running from. He just said, "There's a room in the back. It was my wife's." He hesitated. "There's a bed, clean. You can use it." Clara squeezed the mug between her fingers. "I don't want to take anyone's place. No one's using it." She looked at him then, truly looked at him, and saw the truth he carried, just as she carried hers. 2 broken people sitting in a dark kitchen, sharing coffee and silence. "I'll leave tomorrow," she said. "I don't want to cause trouble." "We'll see about tomorrow," Tomas replied, standing up. "For tonight, sleep." He led her to the back room. It was small, with an iron bed, a wooden trunk, and a window that looked out onto the barn. The quilt was simple, but it smelled of sunshine, as if someone had washed it recently. "Have a good night," he said, and started to leave. "Mr. Tomas," she called, her voice almost inaudible. He stopped at the doorway. "Why did you let me in?" Tomas remained silent for a long moment. Then, without turning around, "Because someone let me in once too, and it made a difference." He closed the door softly. Clara stood in the center of the room, the suitcase still in her hand. Slowly, she placed it on the floor. She sat on the bed, buried her face in her hands and cried, but they were tears of relief, the first rest in months. Outside in the kitchen, Tomas was still standing, looking at the closed door. She didn't know why she'd done it. She didn't know what the town would say. She didn't even know what would happen tomorrow, but she knew with a strange and absolute certainty that this woman hadn't arrived by chance, and that the rain sometimes brought more than water. It brought new beginnings. Clara woke to the crow of a rooster and the scent of wood smoke. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the memory returned. The road, the rain, the open door. She sat up in bed, her body aching, but something in her chest felt lighter. She put on the same dress, she had no other, and tied her hair back with a piece of twine she found in her bag. In the cracked mirror above the trunk, she saw her reflection. Deep circles under her eyes, pale skin, but her eyes looked less haunted. She left the room carefully, like someone entering unfamiliar territory. The house was quiet. In the kitchen, she found the table set, a mug, bread, butter, and a scribbled note. "I'm out in the pasture, coffee's in the pot. Make yourself at home." And in the distance, the figure of Tomas mending a fence, the boy beside him holding nails. She washed the mug, tidied the table, and without much thought started to clean. She swept the floor, dusted the furniture, washed the dishes piled in the sink. Working was better than thinking. Thinking brought back memories. When Tomas returned at noon, he found the house transformed. He stopped in the doorway, surprised. Miguel ran in and stopped too, his eyes wide. "The lady's still here, Dad?" "She is," Tomas replied, taking off his hat. Clara appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on an apron she'd found hanging, an apron that hadn't been used in 3 years. I made lunch," she said hesitantly. "There was beans in the pot, and I found some rice. I hope you don't mind." Tomas looked at the set table, the steam rising from the pots, at this woman cleaning a stranger's house because she couldn't stand to be still. "I don't mind," he said simply. They ate in silence. Miguel, for the first time in a long while, had seconds. Clara ate little, but she observed everything. The way the boy looked at his father, expecting approval that never came in words, but in small gestures, a hand on his shoulder, a nod. After lunch, Clara washed the dishes, and Thomas went back to work. But before he left, he paused. "You can stay another day, if you want." She met his gaze, her eyes moist. "The town will talk. It's already talking." And it was true. At the corner store, Mrs. Madalena was already spreading the news. In the town square, the women were whispering. At the general store, the county inspector, a dry, rule-bound man, was making mental notes to pay a visit. "He's lost his mind," one was saying. "Poor kid," said another. "A lone woman, no family, no name. This won't end well," grumbled a third. But Thomas didn't hear. And if he heard, he wouldn't have cared. Because that night, when he tucked Miguel into bed, the boy asked, "Dad, is the lady leaving?" "I don't know, son. I wish she'd stay. The house is different." Tomas pulled the blanket up to the boy's chin and blew out the lamp. "Different how?" "It's less quiet." And Tomas, alone on the porch afterward, realized his son was right. The house wasn't just clean, it was alive. The days began to find a rhythm. Clara woke early, made coffee, tended to the garden she'd found abandoned in the back. Tomas went out to the pasture with Miguel, and when they returned, there was always hot food waiting. She didn't ask if she could stay. He didn't ask her to leave. One afternoon, while mending a burlap sack on the porch steps, Clara heard a strange noise coming from the barn. It was muffled sobbing. She put her sewing aside and went to investigate. She found Miguel crouched in a corner, hugging his cloth horse, his face red from crying. "What's wrong, little one?" she asked, lowering herself slowly. The boy looked at her with startled eyes as if he'd been caught doing something wrong. "Nothing," he murmured, wiping his face with the back of his hand. Clara sat beside him in the hay. She didn't touch him. She just stayed there. "You know," she began, her voice soft, "when I was a child, I also had a toy I took everywhere. It was a cloth doll my mother made. I used to talk to her when I was sad." Miguel glanced at her sideways. And did she answer?" "Not with words, but I felt like she understood." The boy hugged the horse tighter to his chest. "This one belonged to my mother. She made it for me before she left." Clara felt a tightness in her chest. She must have put a lot of love into it. "You can feel it. Dad doesn't like it when I cry. Your dad doesn't like to see you sad. It's different." Miguel was quiet, processing. Then, with the brutal honesty of children, "Are you leaving too?" Clara swallowed. She looked at this small boy, at the hope and fear mixed on his face. "I don't know, Miguel, but as long as I'm here, I promise I'll take care of you, okay?" He nodded. And then, hesitantly, he reached out his hand and took Clara's. Small, warm, trusting. They stayed like that for a while in silence until Tomas appeared in the barn doorway. "Everything all right in here?" he asked, his voice laced with barely disguised concern. "Everything," Clara replied, standing up and gently releasing the boy's hand. "Just talking." Tomas looked from his son to Clara, and something passed through his eyes. Gratitude, relief, and something else he couldn't name. That night after dinner, Clara taught Miguel simple stitches on a piece of old fabric. The boy would laugh when he made a mistake, his tongue sticking out between his teeth in concentration. Tomas watched from his rocking chair, mending a harness. But his eyes kept returning to the table, to the boy who was finally smiling, to the woman who had brought light into this somber house. "There's a market in town tomorrow," he said suddenly. "If you want, you can go. There's a seamstress who always needs help. Mrs. Beatrice. Good woman." Clara stopped, needle in the air. Are you finding me work? I'm saying if you want to stay, you'll need something of your own, so you're not dependent on anyone." She met his gaze, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Thank you, Tomas." It was the first time she'd called him by name, and the way it sounded, simple, direct, intimate, made something stir within him. Miguel yawned, and Clara took him to bed. She sang a lullaby softly, stroking the boy's hair until he fell asleep. When she returned to the kitchen, Tomas was still there. "He likes you," he said without looking up. "I like him too. And Tomas hesitated. "I'm grateful for everything." Clara moved closer, standing beside him. "You don't need to thank me. A place where I can breathe." And in that moment, they both understood. They were no longer strangers. They were wounds beginning to heal. The town fair was a whirlwind of colors and voices. Clara went with Tomas and Miguel in the wagon, feeling the curious and judgmental gazes of the townsfolk. Mrs. Madalena pointed openly. The sheriff, from a distance, narrowed his eyes. But Mrs. Beatrice, the seamstress, greeted Clara with a warm hug. "Any goddaughter of Tomas is welcome here," the old woman said, and Clara realized the rancher held more respect in town than the gossip suggested. She spent the afternoon helping with mending, and Mrs. Beatrice paid her with fabric and thread. "Come back next week," she said as Clara left. "I have work for months." Clara felt something bloom in her chest. Autonomy, purpose, but the joy was short-lived. 3 days later, Miguel woke up with a fever. His forehead burned. His eyes were glazed. He whimpered softly, calling for the mother who could no longer come. Tomas turned pale. "No," he whispered, more to himself than to Clara. "Not again." She sprang into action. She sent Tomas to fetch fresh water from the well, prepared compresses, made herbal tea she'd learned from her own mother. All night she stayed by the boy's bedside, changing the cool cloths on his forehead, singing softly, whispering promises. "You're going to get better, Miguel. I promise you're going to get better." Tomas lingered in the doorway, unable to enter. The memories were too cruel. Marta in the same bed, the same fever, the same despair. And in the end, the absence. But Clara didn't give up. At 3 in the morning, when the fever finally broke and Miguel fell into a deep sleep, she left the room on shaky legs. She found Tomas sitting on the floor of the hallway, his head in his hands. "He's going to be okay," she said, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. Tomas looked up. He was crying, a big, strong man, broken in half by fear. "I can't lose him too." Clara knelt down, bringing herself to his eye level. "You won't. I won't let you." "How can you promise that?" "Because I know what it's like to lose everything. And I know what's worth fighting for." She took his hands, large and calloused. "And he is." Tomas looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw strength where he expected fragility, courage where he expected fear. "Thank you," he whispered. "We'll thank each other later. Now you need to sleep." But he didn't sleep. He stayed there, in the hallway, while Clara returned to watch over the boy. And for the first time in 3 years, Tomas felt something other than loneliness. He felt hope. The next morning, Miguel woke up asking for oatmeal. The fever was gone. Tomas entered the room as the sun streamed through the window cracks and found Clara asleep in a chair beside the bed, her hand still holding the boy's. He covered them both with the quilt from the chest and stood there, just watching, feeling the house breathe differently. Later, when Clara woke up, He was in the kitchen making coffee. "How is he?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. "Better, because of you." She shook her head. "He's strong. He just needed care." Tomas poured the coffee, but couldn't hold back. "You don't have to do this, Clara." "Do what?" "Take care of us. You don't owe us anything." She held the mug, feeling the warmth. "I'm not doing it because I have to. I'm doing it because I want to." "Why?" Clara met his gaze, her eyes honest and tired. "Because you gave me something I haven't had in a long time. You gave me a place where I can be myself, where I don't have to run." She paused. "And because taking care of you makes me remember that I'm still good for something." Tomas was speechless. Then he simply nodded. And in that silence, something shifted. They were no longer strangers. They were family. The weeks passed, and the house on the hilltop came alive. Clara sewed for Mrs. Beatrice, helped in the garden, taught Miguel to read on rainy afternoons. Tomas worked fewer hours, came home earlier, joined the conversations around the table. The town still talked, but the tone had changed. It was no longer scandal. It was curiosity, perhaps even envy of that strange arrangement that against all odds worked. But the peace was fragile. One afternoon, as Clara was returning from town with a bundle of fabric, she found a man at the gate. Tall, thin, with eyes she recognized immediately. Her stomach dropped. "Hello, Clara," Rodolfo said, his voice drawling, falsely sweet. She stopped 10 feet away, her fingers tightening on the bundle. "What do you want?" "Is that how you greet your husband?" "Ex-husband. You signed the papers." He laughed without humor. "I signed them because you ran off like a thief in the night. But that doesn't mean we're done. For me, it does." Rodolfo took a step forward. Clara backed away. "I came to get you, to take you home. I don't have a home with you. Never did." His face darkened. "You owe me, Clara. After everything I did for you, everything you did?" Her voice trembled, but not with fear, with anger. "You locked me up, you hit me, you told me I was good for nothing. Is that what you call doing something?" He clenched his fists. "I took care of you, gave you a roof, food. You gave me chains." At that moment, Tomas appeared from the barn, the hoe still in his hand. He saw Clara, he saw the man, and understood everything in an instant. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice calm but dangerous. Rodolfo sized him up. "None of your business, friend. She's on my property. It is my business." The two men faced each other. Miguel, inside the house, peered out the window, scared. Clara stepped forward, placing herself between them. "Go home, Rodolfo. I'm not coming back. Never. You have no choice. Without me, you're nothing. I'm so much more without you than I ever was with you." The truth in those words was so solid that Rodolfo recoiled, surprised. But then he saw the way Tomas stood beside Clara, protective without being possessive, and his face twisted into a malicious understanding. "I see. Found another fool to take care of you." He spat on the ground. "But you'll be back. You always come back, because you don't know how to live alone." Clara raised her chin. "You're wrong. I've learned." Rodolfo turned his back, but before leaving, he threw over his shoulder. "I'm going into town. I'll tell everyone who you really are. We'll see how long this saint here can stand you after that." He left, dust rising in his wake. Clara stood frozen, trembling. Tomas dropped the hoe and placed his hand on her shoulder. Firm. "He can't do anything. He can ruin my reputation. He can get the town to run me out. Then let the town go to hell." She looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand. If he spreads lies—" "Clara." Tomas turned her to him, his hands on her shoulders. "I don't care what he says." Clara crumbled. She clung to him and cried, all the tears she'd held back for months, for years. And Tomas held her, awkwardly but firmly, as if he could be a barrier between her and all the evils of the world. Inside, Miguel opened the door. "Miss Clara?" She pulled away, wiped her face, tried to smile. "I'm okay, sweetie. You're not leaving, are you?" Clara looked at Tomas, at the boy, at the house that had become home. "No," she said firm. "I'm not." But she knew the fight was just beginning. Rodolfo hadn't lied. The next morning, the whole town knew. At the general store, the diner, the town square, everyone was whispering. She ran off from her husband, abandoned her home. Shameless woman. The stories were always worse than the truth. Donna Beatriz sent word that she no longer needed help with her sewing. At the farmer's market, the women turned their faces away when Clara passed. At church, the priest, a good man but under pressure, asked to have a word with Tomas. "I understand you wanted to help my son," Father Augusto said in the sacristy, his hands clasped. "But the situation is delicate. The woman has a husband. She has commitments." "Had," Tomas corrected. "She showed me the papers. He signed the separation. But he wants reconciliation. It's his right as a husband." "Right?" Tomas stood up, his voice rising. "The man beat her father. Locked her in the house. That's not marriage, that's a prison." The priest sighed. "I believe you, Tomas, but with her living in your house, with no legal ties, with the boy, the town is concerned. The inspector is concerned too." "Concerned about what?" "About morality, about setting an example." Tomas clenched his fists. "The example is a man helping someone in need. I thought that was a Christian thing to do." "It is, but the world demands more from appearances." "Then the world is wrong." Tomas left, slamming the door. Back home, he found Clara in the kitchen, her eyes red, preparing dinner as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. "I'm leaving," she said, no beating around the bush. "No. Tomas, I'm ruining your life, your reputation, Miguel's. You're saving our lives." "It's no use. The inspector will come. He could take Miguel away from you for an inadequate environment. I can't let that happen." Miguel, hidden behind the door, heard everything. He ran to the kitchen. "No, you can't go." He clung to Clara's waist, crying, You promised you'd stay." Clara knelt, hugged the boy, her own tears falling. "I don't want to, sweetie, but sometimes we have to." "Then marry him," Miguel said, his voice choked. Clara and Tomas froze. "What?" she whispered. The boy wiped his face, fierce in his childish logic. "If you marry my dad, nobody can complain. You'll be my real mum, and nobody can take you away from us." Clara looked at Tomas, desperate, hoping he'd dismiss the absurd idea. But Tomas didn't dismiss it. "He's right," he said slowly. "Tomas, you can't. It wouldn't be real. It would be an arrangement to protect you, to protect all of us. This is madness. It's a solution." Clara stood up, stepped away, her hands on her head. "You don't know me. You don't know anything about me. I know you take care of my son. I know you work hard. I know you're honest." Tomas moved closer. "And I know that if you leave, this house will be a tomb again." "And you?" Clara faced him. "You deserve more than a paper marriage. I deserve peace, and that's what you've brought." The silence was broken by a knock at the door. It was the inspector, tall and stern, with a clipboard and eyes that meant business. "Mr. Tomas, I'm here to conduct an assessment of the domestic situation. There have been reports of irregularities." Tomas opened the door wide, letting him see Clara, Miguel clinging to her, the house clean and organized. "What kind of irregularities?" "A woman without family ties residing under the same roof, with a child present. That raises questions." "She's going to be my wife," Tomas said. "We're getting married next week." The inspector raised his eyebrows. Clara's eyes widened. "Is that true, Mom?" Clara looked at Miguel, at Tomas, at the house that had welcomed her, and taking a deep breath, she replied, "Yes." The inspector jotted something down, suspicious, but nodded. "I'll need the certificate later, and follow up." "You'll have it." When he left, Clara and Tomas stood frozen in the middle of the room, the weight of the decision settling on them. "We don't have to do this," she whispered. "I know." "Then why?" Tomas took her hand, gently, respectfully. "Because some promises we make not with our hearts, we make them with our lives. And you, Clara, you are part of our life now." She squeezed his hand back. "All right, we'll get married." And Miguel finally smiled. The wedding was scheduled for the following Friday at the small church in town. There would be no party. It would be a commitment, a legal document, protection. But Clara wanted it to be more. Not for herself, at least that's what she said, but for Miguel. So the boy would have a good memory, something that wasn't just fear and obligation. Donna Beatriz, who still had respect for Tomas despite the gossip, offered white fabric. "It's not a wedding dress, but it's honest," she said, placing the roll in Clara's hands. That night, Clara sewed by lamplight. Tomas watched from the other side of the table, mending a saddle. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I want to," she replied without looking up. "I want it to be beautiful. For Miguel, and for you?" She stopped, needle in the air. "For me, it's already more than I deserve." "Clara!" "Tomas, we know what this is. It's a piece of paper, an agreement. Nobody has to pretend." He was quiet for a long time. "What if I'm not pretending?" She looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Tomas put down the saddle, ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I just know that when you arrived here, this house was empty, and now it's not. And I don't want it to be again." Clara swallowed. "That's gratitude, Tomas. It's not. I know what it is." He looked her in the eyes. "And I know it's too soon, and it's not fair to ask. But I wanted you to know that when I said home is for those who need a fresh start, I was talking about you, but also about me." The words hung between them, heavy and true. Clara blinked, pushing back tears. "We get married on Friday, and we'll see what happens after. Okay?" "Okay." Friday dawned clear. Miguel woke up early, excited, helped tidy the house, put on the clean clothes Clara had washed. Tomas shaved for the first time in weeks, put on the white shirt he kept for rare occasions. Clara wore the simple dress she had sewn, fitted waist, full skirt, high collar. It wasn't luxurious, but it was dignified. And when she came out of the room, Tomas saw her, and something in his chest expanded. "You look beautiful," Miguel blurted out, his jaw dropping. "Thank you, little one." Tomas said nothing, but his eyes said it all. The church was almost empty. Only Father Michael, Mrs. Beatriz as a witness, the town doctor, a good man who didn't judge, and a few curious folks in the back pews. Rodolfo didn't show, but his shadow was there, in the way some whispered, in the way they looked at Clara. Father Michael conducted the ceremony with respectful brevity. When he reached the vows, he looked at Tomas. "Do you, Tomas de Silva, take Clara as your wife to honor and protect in joy and sorrow?" "I do." Then he turned to Clara. "Do you, Clara, take Tomas as your husband to honor and build a home with him?" Clara took a deep breath. She looked at Tomas, at the man who had taken her in without question, who had defended her honor, who had offered not just a home, but dignity. "I do." The priest joined their hands. "Then by the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." There was no kiss, just a handshake, firm and honest. And Miguel, jumping with joy, shouted, "Now you're my real mom!" Clara knelt and hugged him, crying. As they walked out of the church, the sunlight enveloped them. Tomas offered his arm and Clara accepted. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For giving me a name again, a clean name." Tomas stopped, gently cupping her chin. "You always had a name, Clara. You just needed someone to remind you." And there, at the church door, before God and the whole town, Clara finally understood. She wasn't being saved. She was starting over. Life went on, different but natural. Clara was now Mrs. da Silva. The name opened doors. At the general store, the market, even Mrs. Beatrice started giving her work again. The sheriff made his official visit 2 weeks after the wedding. He inspected the house, spoke with Miguel, checked the papers, everything in order. But before he left, he pulled Tomas aside. "Be careful," he said in a low voice. "Her ex-husband hasn't given up. He's making noise in the county saying the marriage was forced, that she's unstable. Can he prove it? No, but he can cause trouble." The sheriff adjusted his hat. "Keep an eye on her and watch your back." Tomas didn't tell Clara. He didn't want to worry her. But he started noticing things. A shadow on the road at dusk, strange questions at the market, Miguel quieter, as if sensing something in the air. One night, the storm hit. Not just in the sky, but in their lives. It was late, and the rain was falling in torrents. Clara was putting Miguel to bed when they heard it. Violent pounding on the door. Tomas opened it. It was Rodolfo, soaked, drunk, his face contorted with rage. "I want to talk to my wife." "She's not your wife." "She is." "No piece of paper changes what she is. A mistake I made." Tomas slammed the door in his face, but Rodolfo shoved it open, forcing his way in. Clara came running down the stairs, placing herself in front of Miguel, who was crying in the hallway. "Get out of here, Rodolfo. I came to get you. Enough of this nonsense. You're coming back with me now." "I'm not going anywhere with you." Rodolfo lunged, but Tomas intercepted him. The two men shoved each other. Furniture creaked. Clara screamed, "Stop! Stop!" Miguel ran and hugged Clara's legs, sobbing. Tomas managed to push Rodolfo outside into the rain, but the man wouldn't give up. "You think you'll be happy with him?" Rodolfo yelled at Clara. "He doesn't even love you. It's pity, charity. When he gets tired of you, he'll throw you away like I did." "You never threw her away," Tomas said, his voice dangerously calm, "because she was never yours. She belongs to herself, and she chose to stay here. She has no choice. I'm her husband before God." "God sees the heart," Tomas said, "and yours is rotten." Rodolfo tried to lunge again, but something stopped him. It wasn't Tomas. It was Clara. She stepped forward, barefoot in the rain, trembling but firm. "You hurt me," she said, her voice breaking. "You humiliated me. You made me believe I was worthless. And for a long time I believed it." She took a deep breath. "But I am worth something. I always was. And I choose to stay here. I choose this man, this boy, this life. And there's nothing you can do to change that." Rodolfo looked at her, and for the first time he saw defeat. "You'll regret this. I've regretted many things in my life, but I'll never regret running away from you." He spat on the ground, turned his back, and disappeared into the rain. Tomas pulled Clara inside. She was shivering, soaked, but not from the cold. From relief, from freedom. "It's over," he whispered, hugging her. "It's over." Miguel ran and threw himself into their arms, and there they stood, the three of them, intertwined, as the storm raged outside. But inside the house, finally, there was peace. That night, after putting Miguel to bed, Clara and Tomas sat in the kitchen drinking hot coffee. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For letting me choose. For not choosing for me." Tomas held her hand across the table. "The choice was always yours, Clara. I just opened the door." She squeezed his fingers, feeling for the first time that this wasn't just paper. It was real. "Tomas." "Yes?" "If one day you want this to be real, I want it too." He looked at her, surprised and hopeful. "Real?" "Real." And for the first time since they met, he smiled. A wide, genuine smile that lit up the kitchen more than any lamp. "Then it's real," he said. "Since forever." And they sealed it, not with a kiss, but with a promise. The truest one of all. The months passed like calm water. Rodolfo didn't return. They learned later he'd left the region, pursued by debts and a bad reputation. His absence was like sun after rain. Everything breathed easier. Clara blossomed. Her work with Mrs. Beatrice grew. And soon other women in town, who had once judged her, started ordering dresses and alterations. She opened a small workshop in the back of the house with a sewing machine Tomas had bought in the city. Miguel learned to read and write with her. In the afternoons, he'd sit beside her while she sewed and read aloud stories she invented herself. The boy, who had once been quiet and sad, now laughed loudly, ran through the pasture, helped his father with pride. And Tomas began to live again, not just exist, live. One spring morning, Clara woke to the smell of fresh bread. She went downstairs and found the table set, Miguel arranging wildflowers in a mug, Tomas frying eggs. "What's this?" she asked, laughing. "It's the day you arrived here," Miguel said. "It's been a year today." Clara felt her chest tighten with emotion. "You remembered?" "We remember everything that matters," Tomas said, pouring coffee. They had coffee together, talking about the garden, about the new dress order, about the calf due soon. Simple things, family things. Then Tomas took Clara and Miguel up to the highest part of the land, where there was a lone tree, a yellow ipé that he and Marta had planted years ago. "I wanted to plant another one," he said, "a new tree, to mark a new beginning." They dug together. Clara held the sapling. Miguel shoveled dirt. Tomas firmed it into the ground. When they finished, they watered it and stood there, the three of them, looking at that green promise. "When it grows, it'll have flowers," Miguel said. "And shade," Clara added. "And roots," Tomas said, looking at her, "deep roots." That afternoon, while Miguel played in the barn, Tomas and Clara sat on the porch. "You know," he began, his voice hesitant, "when you first came here, I thought I was doing you a favor, but I realized something." "What?" "You didn't need me. You're strong. Always have been." He took her hand. "But I needed you to remind me that a fresh start is possible, that you can live again." Clara rested her head on his shoulder. "So we needed each other then." "Yeah." He kissed her forehead gently. "And we still do. Always." The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. The house on the hilltop, once empty and silent, now breathed with life, laughter, voices, stories. That night, when they tucked Miguel into bed, the boy asked, "Mom, do you still remember when you first got here?" Clara, now a mother, no longer just the young woman, smiled. "I remember." "Why?" "I'm afraid you'll forget and leave." She knelt beside the bed, holding his small hand. "Miguel, listen carefully. Roots that grow deep don't let go. And I've put down roots here. Understand? With you, with your dad, with this house." She squeezed his hand. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my home now, forever." The boy smiled, reassured, and closed his eyes. Clara left the room and found Tomas in the kitchen, finishing the dishes. "He asked if I was going to leave," she said. "And did you answer?" "I told him the truth, that I'm staying." Tomas turned, dried his hands, and pulled her into a hug. Not one of thanks or obligation, but of love. Love that had grown slowly, planted in simple gestures, watered with patience. "Clara?" "Yes?" "I love you." She looked up, her eyes shining. "I love you too, Tomas." And there, in that kitchen lit by a kerosene lamp, where everything had begun with a simple request, just a little corner to sleep, they kissed. A soft, true kiss, sealing not a contract but a lifetime. Outside, the wind blew gently, the newly planted tree swayed, promising flowers, and the dirt road, which had once brought a lost woman, now led only stories of new beginnings. Because in the end, what moved everyone wasn't the gesture. It was the simple miracle of seeing two tired hearts learn that love sometimes begins with a humble request and an open door. And that home isn't where you're born, it's where you choose to stay. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive new stories every day. What would you do in their place? Comment, and share with someone special.